Hey y'all, it's Chris with Rockin Farm, and I have a bit of an announcement today. Just due to time constraints and family issues and things that we need to get done around the farm, I'm sadly announcing that today is probably going to be the last video that you're going to see from me, as we are shutting down our YouTube account. April Fools. Sorry y'all, I just couldn't resist. Something that had to be done. But honestly here, the YouTube channel is not ever going to go anywhere, because a big part of the reason that I do this is for self-documentation. So I have the ability, I'm not good at the whole farm journal thing. I've tried it, I forget about it, but what I can do is go back to the year before and watch my videos from last year and see what time we did things and what I did good and what I did bad and what needs improvement. So the YouTube channel is not ever going anywhere. I figure if I'm doing this for myself, I may as well share it with you. What we are going to do is, you're seeing this on April 1st. It is officially March 31st, so it's the last day of March, and we are going to be doing our first garden tour of the season. Now, we haven't planted any of our spring plants, what I would consider our spring plants, in the garden yet. We've had a little bit of a cold weather snap, and I'm also having some issues with my seedlings this year. I'm really perplexed because soil moisture is good, nutrient in the soil is good, started out with a good organic potting mix. Seed was nice and healthy, everything germinated well, soil temp, just everything is, the conditions are right. They're getting the right amount of light per day, they're getting the right amount of rest per day, and they are just really failing to thrive. I may actually end up having to go to the big box store and pick up some tomato plants this year, which is really unfortunate because it defeats the purpose of having a seed starting system. The peppers are still looking okay, but just all the tomatoes and tomatillos and stuff like that, just not looking good at all. So we'll see what we have to do. I'm going to give them a couple more weeks to come around and see what happens. But what I do have is what would be my winter or early spring, late winter garden. Things like onions and peas. The garden is looking beautiful. I just want to take you around and show you what we've got going on. As always, hit that subscribe button, click that notification bell, and go check out the website, rockin8farm.com. The garden isn't necessarily in its most beautiful state right now. The perennials are starting to come back, but I need to go through and trim out dead growth. But that's the first thing I want to talk about, is perennials. And that is something that I think all gardeners should think about. We get so hooked on this mindset of annual vegetables, tomatoes, peppers, stuff like that. So let's go ahead and talk perennials, because it is very, very nice to have something that you plant once, harvest off of, and get a lot of years out of without having to plant again. So I think the first thing worth mentioning, and please ignore the weeds, as I said, we need to come in. It is spring, so things are growing that we don't necessarily want growing. But this mint has been in the ground for a couple of years, and what's really cool about mint, both cool and not cool, I guess, is that mint likes to spread. I purposely stuck this in a corner where I don't really care what it does. So you can see I've got last year's dead growth sitting here, and you can see the bulk of the mint coming up right there. But look over here, 2, 3, 4 feet away from the plant, growing outside of the garden area. And to be honest with you, if this entire hillside outside of the garden area gets covered with mint, that does not bother me at all. This is our marshmallow, and you can see it coming back from the root. And this is what we notice about marshmallow, is that it does die all the way back every single year, but it always comes back from the base. Marshmallow is a really cool herb. When you put a marshmallow in your mouth, you know that kind of film that you feel in your mouth after eating a marshmallow? Well, that film is from the marshmallow plant, or at least it was when they were still made with marshmallow. What's great about this marshmallow herb, is you can dry it out and make it into a tea, or leave it fresh and make it into a tea. And it's really, really good for anything where you desire that coating, a sore throat. Let's say you're not quite sure what's going on with the throat, might be a little bacterial stuff. So you can take some oregano, take some mint, and take some marshmallow, make a tea out of it, and it's very soothing for a sore throat. The marshmallow gives it that coating action, so it doesn't hurt so bad when you swallow. The mint kind of opens things up a little bit, and the oregano is a natural antibiotic, so it can kind of help kill some of that stuff. Again, this is my personal opinion. I'm not actually a doctor. I haven't done any scientific research to prove that herbs are good for you. So Don't necessarily take my advice from it. This is my personal experience. Something else that I consider a perennial herb, these are wild blackberries. Down here in the South, when they grow wild like this, people will call them dewberries, but you can take the leaves off of a blackberry plant and use them for medicinal purposes as well. Oregano is something that I almost can't stop from growing here. So again, it's another great medicinal plant, great in culinary uses. Now, obviously, when people think perennials, they think herbs, but herbs aren't the only things that are perennials. We have a couple of other perennials growing on the property as well, and I think you can see one of them behind me. Our asparagus has come back wonderfully this year. The thing with asparagus is you almost have to come out and harvest daily. Now, this is asparagus that we put in the ground last year. So last year was officially its first growing season. This year is its second growing season. And in asparagus, there's kind of rules while you're trying to establish an asparagus patch. The first year, you don't want to harvest anything. The second year, somewhere around 10, maybe up to 20% of the asparagus can be harvested without damaging the plants. By the time you get to your third year, you can harvest asparagus and know that it's going to come back. You can see a very nice spear coming up right there. I'll probably come out and harvest that one along with anything else that's ready tomorrow, because if I don't, it's going to be getting up to fern size within a couple of days because this stuff grows fast. One of the other perennials that we have in our garden, and I am super excited about these are our Egyptian walking onions. And y'all, these things this year finally just really took off. I put these in the ground a couple of years too. We've taken a green off of them here or there, but by and large, I wanted this to establish itself. When we went into the dead of winter, I had a few very small plants. And then when we got into spring, man, these things just got massive and they really took off. It's a perennial onion. There's also what they call a top setting onion. So it's going to grow a tall stalk that's going to have little onion sets on it. When they get heavy enough, they lean over, touch the ground, and they root. That's why it's called a walking onion. But like I said, it's an onion that comes back year after year. So if I need onion flavor and I didn't have time to plant onions or I had issues with onions, I've got onion flavor right here. Now, we also have several things in our gardens that aren't necessarily perennials per se, but they are things that you kind of plant once and then that's that. I have two small square 4-foot beds that year after year are going to be filled with more herbs. And like I said, they do die back, but what's really cool is that if you let them go to seed, they drop their seed the next year, they come back with no intervention from you. So they're perennial-like in nature in that I plant them once and then they plant themselves after that. Cilantro is a flavor we really enjoy. Not everybody enjoys it. I know plenty of people that, you know, they can taste the cilantro in a salsa and it's not a flavor they enjoy, but it's a flavor we really enjoy. And for all of our Mexican dishes and for a lot of our Asian style dishes, we really enjoy the flavor of cilantro, and nothing beats fresh cilantro that's coming out of your garden. Now, this 4-foot bed here doesn't have anything popping up in it yet, but it is going to very soon. There is so much basil seed in this bed from previous seasons that it's just a matter of time before we have basil coming out of our ears. Chamomile is another medicinal wonder that, you know, here in Central Texas, it gets to looking really cruddy during the winter. It gets to looking really cruddy during the hottest part of the summer, but you plant it once and it just kind of keeps spreading and keeps coming back. So eventually I would imagine that this entire bed is just going to be a chamomile bed. It'll probably eventually choke out anything else that we plant in it. But for right now, we are able to still get a few other things in it. I've got a little bit of spinach here. I've got some garlic chives. I believe those are some beets that are kind of growing back there, seed that I just threw in. Now, we're actually getting pretty close to wrapping up the garden tour because it's just that time of year where things are just kind of starting to grow. But we do have some things that we planted back in January or even back as far as November and October that are just going gangbusters right now and that I cannot wait to harvest. One of the things that we decided last year was that we wanted to make sure that we were trying to plant enough garlic that from year to year we could harvest all of the garlic that we needed for our culinary needs, but then also be able to keep quite a bit of it as seed to go ahead and plant the next year so that I can stop buying garlic, whether it's for seed purposes or for eating. Now you look at this bed right here and you go, Chris, there's no way that that is enough garlic to last you a year. No, it's not. I would say that this is probably the amount of garlic that I would need to have garlic seed for next year. And then this half of this bed here, and all of this bed here is the garlic that we'll be eating for the year. This particular garlic is called music garlic. We really enjoy the flavor of it. You get nice big cloves out of it. And then when you break apart the cloves, the individual garlic pieces are also fairly sizable. It's got kind of a milder flavor, but it definitely has that garlic flavor. So it's just a brand that we really enjoy. This is the first year that we actually planted it ourselves, but when I ordered the seed, we had enough left over that we were able to take a few good specimens and go ahead and chop them up and use them. So we know that we made the right decision because we know we like this garlic. Now, the other garlic variety that we tend to plant is not actually a true garlic, but it is something that we enjoy the flavor of. Plus, it's just kind of one of those things that you plant in your garden that's cool. Not everything about a garden has to be like, if this doesn't sustain my life, then it has no purpose in my garden. We plant things in our garden because they're cool. We plant things in our garden because we get great use out of them. And we also plant some things in our garden just because they're pretty and they make us happy. Elephant garlic is one of those things that is just kind of cool. It's growing well. I mean, I don't really know what else to say about it other than it's getting really big, and we're going to get nice big cloves of this elephant garlic. Again, it has a milder garlic flavor. It's got just really big chunks, and it's just kind of something that's cool to talk about it. It's probably not necessarily something that we necessarily have to have in our garden. It's just something that we like to have in our garden. Now that we've seen the garlic, that's going to bring us to onions. And y'all, did we plant some onions? I planted onions everywhere I could fit an onion, as well as having designated onion beds. What's really cool about growing in Central Texas is that just about the time that your plants that you are putting in the ground, let's say we're talking about your tomatoes and your peppers, I'll just throw those out there. By the time those start to get enough size on them that they might be shading out things that would be growing under them, is about the time that it's time to harvest your garlic and your onions here in Central Texas. When the weather really starts to warm up and these things have been in the ground for months, you're really going to start to see them starting to turn yellow and fall over. Anywhere from mid-May all the way through June, generally speaking, by July 1st, you have harvested garlic and onions here in Central Texas. Different people will tell you different things, but that's because Central Texas is still really big. I mean, you got to figure the area that we consider Central Texas is as big as some states. So climates can vary between, you know, the Killeen area, the College Station area, the San Marcos area, the Bastrop area. These are all things that are hours apart from each other. But they're all still considered Central Texas. So in my area where I live, generally speaking, if the onions aren't out of the ground, if the garlic isn't out of the ground by the time July 1st hits, it's weird. So, but that's also about the time that my peppers and tomatoes start getting really big. So it just works out really well for that succession planting to be able to drop peppers and tomatoes into my garlic and onion patches and then harvest the garlic and onions, and the tomatoes and peppers have plenty of room to do what they need to do. So with that said, let's talk onions, y'all. I planted 3 different varieties of onions. I planted a red onion, I planted a white onion, and I planted a Texas sweet. You can't live in Texas and not grow the Texas sweet onion. These onions right here are actually the red Creole onions. They got a little bit of a sweet bite to them, but they've got really good flavor. And this entire bed here is those Texas super sweet onions that I was telling you about. They're called the Texas Legend. Y'all, I have got some onions. I mean, if you look at every single one of these things, they are just big and they're healthy and they made it through the freeze just fine. You can still see all the hay on the ground there, because the way that I helped these things make it through the freeze was by putting about a 2-foot big fluffy layer of hay over top of them. Now, one of the things I'm doing with my onions, because I had so many that they filled my bed, is that I also took some and I planted them much, much closer together, Basically what I did is I planted all of the biggest, healthiest onions on that side, and I planted them about 5 inches apart from one another. I took the smaller, more spindly onions and I planted them on this side, and I planted them all really close to each other, just a couple inches apart. So the reason I did this is because I had leftover onions, but we can take these and use these as spring onions. So for example, what I can do is I can come in here and I can take this onion, but leave this one and leave this one. And then take this onion and this onion here, leaving this one. And the result is that now they are about 4 or 5 inches apart. So by coming in here and harvesting a little bit of onion for a little bit of onion flavor, I get a nice little spring onion that I can take and put in my cooking. And the onions on either side of it can continue to grow and get bigger. So if we don't end up harvesting all of these as spring onions by coming through and picking every other one, we end up with more large onions. These are planted on the inside of our arch trellises here, which eventually this entire area is going to be completely shaded out and nothing is going to grow all that well. So that's why we put these more spindly onions on this side. So we did the same thing over here with our white onions. These are all the white onions that I can use as spring onions. And these are all the white onions that we plan on harvesting for cooking throughout the year. So that brings us down to one last plant that is worth mentioning, and these are the peas that we planted in January. Again, they were about yay big when that big freeze hit Texas, and I was a little worried about them, but underneath the hay, they did fine, and now they're growing awesome. These are by far my favorite pea. They're called an orchid tendril pea. And what's cool about these is that the tendrils are edible and they just taste like fresh peas. The peas are awesome fresh and they're pretty good cooked too. So if you're not a big cooked pea fan because you know they're mushy or whatever, you crack these pea pods open and throw them in a salad, y'all, to die for. It's just freshness, like incredible fresh flavor in a little ball. I mean, that's the only way I can really explain it. It's like when you go someplace and take a sip out of a mountain stream and it's just that unbelievably fresh. I've never had water like this before. That's the only way I can explain these peas. Just crisp and fresh and delicious. I'm gonna be completely honest. Last year we only had 3 plants planted and not a whole lot of them made them inside because we would pick pods and eat peas as we were walking around and working the garden. Man, there were times that I ate so many peas when I went inside I was full. So we took care of that problem this year. I have 3 there, 2 that made it there, 2 that made it there, 3 more over here, 3, 3, 3, and 3. I think we're going to be pretty good on peas, and we're looking forward to trying to can some of them and then give those a try and see how good these are when they're cooked and canned. Again, cool thing about these peas is we planted them in January. You can see how well they're growing at the very end of March. We will be getting peas off of them and they will really be putting on some height before you know it. But I can take like my cucumber seeds or climbing squash seeds. I can take other seeds and I can set them right there where these peas are growing. And about the time that they're getting enough height on them that they need to start climbing and taking over these trellises, the peas are going to be done. So again, it's just that succession planting. I'll put a seed in the ground now. By about June, it's going to be wanting to take over the trellis, but that's fine because the peas will have been done for a month because it just gets too hot for them. So that's it for the plants in this garden tour. There's a few things I want to show you as far as projects we've done around the garden, but you can see, I mean, we've already got quite a bit of vegetation and greenery and edibles in a garden, and we haven't even officially planted our spring garden yet. Once we get tomatoes and peppers and eggplants and beans and squash and all the things going in this garden, it's going to be quite the sight to see. Now, one of the goals that I set for myself at the very end of 2020 going into 2021 was that I wanted to add quite a bit of plantable squares footage to the garden space. I've definitely accomplished that goal, even though it's not quite what I had in mind. We were planning on expanding the garden into another area, and I was doing a lot of cleanup to get that ready. We just ran out of time, ran out of money, and just weren't able to accomplish it. But despite that, I was able to get quite a bit of garden space added to our garden compared to our 2020 summer garden. All three of these large beds are new. So obviously that one was there back in October or November when we planted garlic. These two, I was able to get them in the ground before January so that we could get all the onions planted in them. This is our newest bed, which replaces the bucket line, and you can actually still see buckets down there. I cut this bed off at 24 feet because it's just kind of what I had time and supplies for. But eventually this garden bed will run the entire length of this fence, and then all of these buckets can be used on the other side of the garden. So these buckets here are where that bed was last year. All we have to do is hook up the PVC hose, run it along the fence, and then all of these will have drip irrigation to them as well. They won't be spaced as closely together as they are now, but by adding that bed, I freed up all of these buckets. And things like cherry tomatoes and peppers grow really well for me in buckets. So we have quite a bit of cleanup that we need to do. We need to get our lighting and all of our little pretty things into the garden. We need to get some trellises in and just get stuff picked up, get some things weeded. But you can see that we've laid down all of this beautiful mulch. We have all these gorgeous beds made out of pallets that, other than nails and screws, I didn't pay a penny for. All leading out to a really pretty view of the property. So make sure, especially if you're in Central Texas, that planting your garden is planting a space that you want to be. I think a lot of the success of our garden is that we are in our garden every day. My wife and I actually call it date time. Right around 4 or 5 o'clock, maybe a little bit later during the hottest part of the summer, we go out, we collect eggs, the nighttime eggs. We go out and give all the animals their dinner. We come into the garden and we harvest, and then we just sit and enjoy a cool beverage, sit and enjoy each other. And it's literally our date time. So even the kids know. Somebody will call and say, is your mom and dad there? And they'll say, no, they're on their date. So the garden, because the garden is someplace that we just really enjoy being, then it's a place that we frequent, which means that you catch the problems. You see the bug damage, you see the fungus, you see the drip emitter that's clogged because you're out there every day. And that's one of the reasons that I really encourage people to make their garden a place that makes them happy and a place that they want to be. So y'all, this has been Chris with Rockin Farm. We will see you for another garden tour at the end of April. I'm not 100% sure where the garden's going to be at that time, but I know it's going to be a place I enjoy being. So until I see y'all next week, just remember to be happy and live healthy.